Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Justin Zoom's sharing session. This is your host, Justin Ng. It's nice to have our audience back today. In today's topic, we'll go through a special guest who played a humongous role in my days in university. Evidently, we had the time of our lives doing the things that surprisingly do not relate to our majors, but more on that later on. A bit more of that about this session. This Zoom sharing session provides a platform for everyday people like you and me to share their thoughts in life. And I'm so excited to hear from my guest today. She is Sue Lyn. Would you kindly say hi?
Hi, Justin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
It's an honor to have you here today, Sue Lyn. This session will focus on her background and major, and who else is better to enlighten us on her life than the woman herself? Sue Lyn, could you tell us more about yourself?
Okay, so that's a lot to unpack there, but off the top of my head, I am a law student. I did my LLB at Queen's University, where Justin did his undergraduate degree, and then I moved on to do my postgraduate diploma, the bar course, plus my LLM at City University London. As we are recording this, I've finished the core components of my bar. I'm left to get my results for my specialism and submit my dissertation for my LLM. And then at the side for the past 6, 7 years now, I think I have been doing hosting and content creation on the side. So I do YouTube as a hobby, but I also do professional hostings, emceeing. Sometimes I would help clients film interviews and things like that for a freelance as well. So that's basically me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Sue Lyn. First and foremost, I want to say congratulations on finishing your exams. You're one
Thank
step
you.
closer to being a lawyer. I'm so excited for you. And it's great to hear that someone like you who's striving to be a lawyer is also indulging herself in many different projects, whether it be related directly to law or something entirely different like hosting and interviews and media production. I'm so excited to hear more of that later on too. But first, let's dive deep into the mind of Sue Lyn and find out what is her take on the realms of law. So first and foremost, I would like to ask you, how did you find out you want to do law? What is your origin story?
My origin story. Okay, this is like Superman. This is cool. This is fun. Okay. So I have been okay, let's start. A small event back in I guess wasn't small. It was something that changed me for sure. But I used to be bullied in primary school because I went to a Chinese primary school, but I did not speak a wick of Chinese. But my English was pretty decent because I was a first language mother tongue English speaker. So I get bullied for being an outcast. But then when I started joining the competitions, like public speaking or debating or storytelling competitions back then, I would almost always win something for my class. And that was the only time that my class kind of valued me or didn't bully me or actually, praised me and liked me because I was winning for them. And ever since then, I guess no one really stood up for me back then. I've always been a person that's very talkative. I never like to hold my tongue. I always speak my mind. I always question traditions, the way things are done. And I would think I'm a very logical and structured person. So I think all of these factors come to fast forward today, or as of a few years ago, I guess. I am a person that cannot stand for injustice. I cannot stand for things that I don't believe is right. And because I have spent so many years cultivating not only a voice, because you have a thick skin to speak, but you also have the training to speak properly in a way. So I think all of this comes together to I have a tool that I can use that I can do pretty well. And also it crosses the Venn diagram between I'm willing to use it for these purposes. I cannot stand for injustice and thus law.
Wow, that's so beautifully said. You started off as somebody who has to stand up for herself, and now you want to strive to be somebody to stand up for those who couldn't protect themselves. That's very, very noble of you. And
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm very curious about the process of becoming a lawyer. Could
Mm-hmm.
you, on a general note, could you run us through the process of becoming a lawyer? You could perhaps speak from a Malaysian perspective or any perspective.
Okay. So there are honestly many ways to become a lawyer. It is very jurisdiction based, and it's also just you could do a major or an undergraduate in anything, almost anything. And then you can do what we call a GDL, which is a conversion course. And then you can jump back to do the bar course, which is the professional training course. So in that way, you don't necessarily have to do a law degree. But from my personal experience, a law degree was already tough. It prepared me for the bar, but it is still tough. So for those who come in from a different course, I have full admiration for them for their ability to switch. But yes, there are many ways to switch. Personally, so because of that, I can't name all the different ways, but I can tell you how I got to the point where I am today. So after my SBM, I went to INTI International College Penang. I did my Cambridge A levels there. I took law, economics, and business. I also took math, but I couldn't do AS math, so let's not talk about that. And then from there, I went to Queen's University Belfast, did my LLB undergraduate degree. After that, then you move into the professional training course, which is the bar professional training course. And then I do that at City University London, but I have not seen the campus at all because of COVID.
I see. It's quite interesting that you brought a Malaysian perspective to this because in many countries they go through different processes. I
Mm-hmm.
know from the US you have to do a normal degree, then go into law school. But in
Yes.
Malaysia, you can do a A levels, then proceed to a law undergrad, or you could just
Mm-hmm.
directly go to a law undergrad. The possibilities of becoming a lawyer really are endless. And you
Yes.
did mention it's a tough process. What was the most difficult thing in that process?
I think I need to caveat that by saying that in the beginning, so let's say it's a pyramid going up. So you start with your A levels, and then you start with undergraduate, and then you go to postgraduate, and then you go up to your pupillage. As you go up, at the bottom, it's quite easy to get into and it's not that difficult. So it becomes like this catch all for a lot of people when they don't know what they want to study and their parents just, oh, especially Asian parents, they're like, oh, get a profession, just go do a profession. So a lot of people end up like, I think about from my experience at least about 40% of my classmates when we first meet each other in law school like, oh, so why are you here, right? And then maybe some people will say, oh, because I want to be a lawyer, or because I want to try it out, et cetera, et cetera. About 40% will say, because I didn't know what else to do. So you find that law is very welcoming and very open at the beginning. But then as you go up and you try to become a lawyer, it becomes more and more stringent. The filters are tighter and tighter, and it becomes harder and harder to progress. And then it really starts making you question whether or not you want to be a lawyer. So getting into undergraduate is not easy for sure, but it's also not very difficult per se. They accept a wide range of qualifications to get into undergraduate. And then once you get through your undergraduate course, which is not the easiest course, but it's also not the hardest course, admittedly, then you go into bar school. So bar school, a lot of universities will tell you that they accept nothing less than a 2-2, but generally in practice, what we see is that 2-1 and above. Otherwise, you have to have a really good reason for not getting a 2-1. And you also have to have a BCAT, which is this like an aptitude test. It tests your critical reasoning. It tests your ability to argue and to switch positions that are totally opposite from yours. So you in that test, you may have to argue against the environment, or you may have to tell the examiner 5 reasons for why smoking is good and advocate for that, right? And that is part of your entrance exam before you can get into the bar school. And then when you get to bar school, then let's just say I've never had this many mental breakdowns in my life, but I'm very glad that I'm standing here talking to you.
Well, it certainly shows how how do I say strong you are to go through this entire process. And through this process, is this particularly for people studying in the UK, or is this the same in other places like Malaysia?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. So, in terms of the structure, it's pretty much the same. So, you have to get an LLB, which is an undergrad, and then you have to do a postgraduate. There are certain exceptions, but generally, we find that you will do an LLB and you'll do a postgraduate, then you'll do a pupillage year, which is a training year, and then you become a fully qualified lawyer. So, that part is the same. But the teaching we find that is quite different. So in the UK, right off the bat, you're trained to float for yourself. You're trained to do your own research. You're trained to study yourself. Very little is given to you by way of notes. You are given a lot of guidance. You are encouraged to ask questions, but the answers will not be provided unless you ask, generally, like in an easy way to describe it. But in Malaysia, for my friends who are studying undergraduate law here, we find that because lecturers are kind of encouraged to have you pass, a lot of it is spoon fed. So you have like these bundles of notes that are just given to you on the first day. So you don't actually have to read the textbooks or explore yourself. As long as you get these notes in your brain, you'll probably pass the exam. So we see a difference in teaching styles. And that becomes quite a shock because a lot of people do a either 1+2 or 2+1 program where they spend 1 or 2 years in Malaysia and then they link to a UK university. So when they do that, the teaching style changes and that becomes a culture shock in the middle of the year. And some people may struggle, not necessarily all, but some people do find that because, they're so used to being spoon fed, when they're left on their own, they are not completely equipped enough, I would say. Not to say that the Malaysian system is bad, obviously. It just depends what you want to get out of your education.
I see. It's quite interesting you brought up the teaching methods. I know in a way that asking questions to know the Socratic method has been a very historically proven method of teaching, and I really like that method. And a thought came to my mind. Since you mentioned that most of the time when you're in school you are taught to question and taught to think about things, is it true that most of the time you learn theories and case studies revolving around law instead of learning law itself?
That's a very good question. So we have to learn, yes, we have to learn all of that actually. So when you do your LLB, for example, it gives you a base. It gives you a base idea for everything. And to have a base idea, you kind of have to know what happened before because law is a continuously evolving subject. So for example, the law currently is A equals B, but you would also learn that 50 years before, B actually equals C. Why do we need to learn that? Because if another 50 years down the line, society evolves and we realize that maybe this principle currently, the principle here, is not exactly that suitable. So we then look back to old cases or we look to other jurisdictions to advocate for change because you can't just change out of nowhere. You need some reference point. So we end up studying like a bunch of things that may not be currently applicable just so that we know why things are the way they are today.
I see. That's quite interesting. So going through the whole process of law, I was wondering, it is quite tough. You have to learn a lot of things.
Yeah.
What other fun things have you have done in your course?
Oh, okay. So this is very personal to me. I'm a person that likes talking, obviously, and I love advocacy, or as lay people call it, fighting. So I love the debate classes. I In bar school we have what we call advocacy classes, which are literally just how to present to a judge or how to question a witness or how to prepare for a hearing and things like that. So I think that would be my favorite classes because I just love to actually practice. But I also do know of people who really enjoy legal research. They enjoy exploring further. So just now I mentioned 50 years. Some people really enjoy learning about what happened 100 years ago or what happened in Australia 20 years ago or just exploring the whole breadth of whatever area they're in. For me, I'm a very practical, practice based person. So I like criminal and family law, where it's really just what is happening now. I'm not looking to advance the law, I'm looking to practice it and find the best way for my client. So that's just personal preference.
I see. And when you mentioned the debate classes, I'm very curious. Do you have any stories that stand out?
Oh, okay. I have so many stories. Okay, I'll give you one funny one and then one that is like more similar to what we see in movies. So in different courts, we have different terminology for judges. So it's maybe sir, madam, or then when you go higher, it's your honor or my lady, my lord, and then you go up and up. When we were first starting out in bar school, I will not name my classmate, but everyone knows who he is. So we were so used to calling sir and ma'am. At one point, I think he got really stressed out and he called the judge, which is the lecturer. The lecturer plays the judge. So in these classes, basically, we pretend that we are in real courts. So once the lecturer says, okay, almost like action, and then the lecturer goes like, welcome, good afternoon, advocates, Miss Chang for the defense, and it really is like a court setting to give you that kind of flavor. Anyway, so he goes and the judge does an intervention, which is the judge interrupts you halfway and questions you. So this is part of our skill set as well. And after he answers the judge, he gets flustered, obviously, because all of us do, right? We get nervous, and he goes like, "Yes, Your Majesty." And then the best part was we were all laughing. Like all of us, it was a small class. So advocacy classes are very small. There were 4 of us, 4 students, and he just goes, "Your Majesty." And you cannot break character. Okay, you're not allowed to laugh. Because like in real court, you're not allowed to laugh, right? And we all just could not hold it in for anything. And one by one, you just see all of us turning off our cameras. And just laughing and laughing. And we texted in our group chat and we're just like, "Your Majesty," in like cap locks. And it was the funniest thing ever. And you could see that he himself noticed that he messed up, but he just carried on. And then one by one, as the people disappeared, he started giggling. And I think the lecturer didn't notice until the end. Then we told him, "Sir, do you like being called Your Majesty?" He's like, "I didn't even realize that happened, but thank you." But yeah, that's just one of the funny things that happened. And a couple of times after that, we also had another case similar to that where we basically went to a different court. So we had to call the judge by something else that we were used to. And my friend kept saying the wrong one and we didn't know how to help her. So what I did was I wrote down the correct term. I wrote down "Your Honor" on a piece of paper. And I just held it up to the camera the whole class and I just kept pointing to it. I just kept pointing to it and just like hope she wouldn't mess up. And it actually did help her. So I'm actually really happy with that. Okay. Similar to movies, there was one class that we basically were assigned to watch like 7 clips of lawyers interviewing or cross-examining witnesses throughout the ages. So some of the movies I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they were from the like 1980s because you can see it's black and white, all the way to like modern Legally Blonde. But and then we were all just watching it. And then like after all of it, the lecturer goes like, "Okay, let's go through and you can tell me one by one which in which clip, which lawyer, and what was their mistakes." And we were just like, "We were enjoying the movie. Can we get back to you on that?" Because we didn't know that we had to critique. That's like you watch these law shows and you just enjoy them. But then when you actually get down to like, okay, let's actually look at the technique, whether they abided by the rules of conduct or proper practices. It's kind of like how doctors would question Grey's Anatomy and be like, is what the lawyer says legit? Is what the doctor says legit? That kind of thing.
I see. That's so cool. I didn't know that you guys have a lot of cool things in your curriculums, from debates to watching movies and critiquing the lawyers in those movies to all kinds of things. I was I find the one about Your Majesty being really hilarious.
I have to caveat because my specialism is in advanced criminal practice. So I had an advanced criminal advocacy class. So compared to just a normal person at bar school, unless they took the same specialisms as me, they may not have as much experience in advocacy classes because they probably did something else. So I
I
just
see.
have more advocacy classes than people who don't take my selections. So
Interesting. Let's talk more about your focus
okay.
majors in laws. If
Mhm.
I'm not mistaken, they are criminal and family law.
Yep, correct.
So could we know a bit more about what is criminal and family law, or
Okay.
are they both different things, or are they together?
They are very, very different. All right. So just broadly, just like a crash course law 101. Obviously, it differs based on jurisdictions, but these are general principles that you can apply worldwide. The law is divided into 2 types: criminal and civil. All right. So, criminal law is a person, an individual, or a company versus the government generally. All right. So, it's always the government suing the person or vice versa. And then when you talk about punishments or sentences that can restrict your liberty, so we're talking about incarceration, custody, things like that, that is almost exclusive to criminal law. So only the government can put you in jail. Only the government can issue a house arrest. Only the government can restrict your liberty. All right. And then we talk about civil law, which is an individual versus an individual, or a company versus an individual, or a company versus a company. In that case, then we have damages or injunctions as your possible remedies, but you won't be able to restrict a person's liberty. So there are broadly two branches. And because there are two branches, there are almost completely different procedures in terms of like how you want to issue proceedings, how you want to defend proceedings, the standard of proof, the burden of proof. And that can be an entire podcast on its own, the difference between family and criminal law. But just to answer your question, so my specialisms are in criminal law and in family law. Family law is a branch of civil law, right? But the reason why I love criminal and family law, and I have for so many years, is because when I imagine the work, I imagine a person. So personally, I'm not very drawn to things like corporate law or company law or IP law even. To me, it's just a bit too abstract. Yes, I can study it, but it isn't my kind of flavor. So I like laws where I can imagine the person in situation A, in situation B, and that's what leads me to criminal and family law, despite them being from two separate branches. But obviously some lawyers with experience, you can switch between both perfectly fine as well. But we generally find that eventually down the road, lawyers tend to specialize.
I see that's pretty cool. Like getting to see how the skill tree or the pathways there is in law. I'm just curious here. Is there such a thing as environmental law? Because I'm sure I know that you're a huge advocate for environmental protection, and I was wondering, is there a whole field for that?
Yes, there is. So environmental law in itself is a separate field of law. It's one of the subdivisions. And yes, I am an environmentalist. Unfortunately, I don't really like environmental law per se. So that's not going to be one of the ways that I contribute to the environment, just because environmental law is quite abstract. My brain I have a preference towards laws that I can envision people and people actions, versus environmental law is very much in the numbers. You're looking at impact, you're looking at, kind of a bit more abstract concepts. So it's not really an area of law that I think I would do very well in. But yes, it does exist, and it is a growing field. Unfortunately, environmental lawyers they aren't paid as well, because obviously when it comes to ways to help the environment, we see across the board, not just in law, but a lot of people that are advocating for helping the environment are just underappreciated. And that pretty much applies to law as well, unfortunately.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for answering my question on that. Now, we have gone through all the questions I have, and now I'm very excited to present to you with the questions our viewers have.
Oh my
So a few
gosh.
days ago, I posted a little poll on Instagram asking my friends and family, what would you like to ask a person who studies law? And
Mhm.
I've gone through the list and I found 8 very interesting questions. I can't wait to ask them to you. So
All right.
feel free to answer them. If you choose not to, that's okay as well. So we'll start with the first one. The number one question here is, how does one change the laws set in a country? Let's say Malaysia, for example.
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Thank you for that. Disclaimer, this is not legal advice, obviously. But what we have is that when we talk about the law, we have what we call statutes. So that is what is set by parliament. So your governors or your ministers, they get together in parliament, they decide to write legislation, and then you come up with something act 1994. That is the statute. So that basically tells you, let's say murder is bad, murder involves these elements, these are the elements of murder. And then we come down to what we call common law, which is judge made law. So these laws come in to fill the gaps that are left by parliament. So ministers, 500 ministers sitting in a room can't determine or can't talk about or discuss every single element. And sometimes that one tiny thing in a story makes the whole, it changes the whole idea. So then common law comes in to pretty much patch up these little things. But common law can't, so the judges can't go against what the ministers say, because ministers are your elected officials and they are the primary ones to go like, this is the law in the country. Let's say abortion is illegal. So abortion is illegal. Judges cannot come along and be like, abortion is legal in these cases, blah, 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 unless that has already been set by ministers. So for example, if ministers put a blanket ban on abortion, judges can't make an exception. But if ministers put a ban on abortion with, let's say, the exception of if the mother's life is in danger, and they don't go beyond saying that, then what do you mean by the mother's life is in danger? How danger are we talking about here? And then your lawyers come in and they start debating, well, actually, if we talk about her mental health, that could be her life in danger, because her mental health is her life, blah, blah, blah. And then the other side of the lawyer may come in like, well, actually, when we talk about danger, we should only be looking at the critical chance of fatality or something like that. And then you have all these arguments, and then you have judges ruling on this, and then that becomes common law. So then let's say just an example here, let's say your common law, the judge decides the mother's mental health is a threat to her life, and so it falls under what Parliament has dictated. So then you have your common law and your statute law, right? The reason I have to explain this is because how you change both of these are very different as well. So how you change statute is basically Parliament. So Parliaments, their ministers and their teams of lawyers will get together, they'll discuss and they'll evolve the law as we always see. So that's pretty much the standard system that we see. And then when it comes to common law, we have a hierarchy. So according to your 6 levels of court, a present court can override a previous decision by the same level, but not at a higher level. All right. And then when you go up higher, if you are ruling on a lower court's decision, you can just override that whenever. So for example, the Court of Appeal can almost always override a decision of the High Court, for example. And then if something has been decided by the Supreme Court, the only way to change that is to go back to the Supreme Court, because there's no court higher that can overrule them.
I see. It's quite a meticulous process. I imagine
That's
it
why we
takes.
spent 4 years on law school.
Man, I imagine it takes months or even years to just change
Yeah,
something. It's
very much
crazy.
so. And it's very
And
important to remember that, sorry,
oh no,
this
it
is a
is.
bit important. To change common law, especially, you have to remember that there has to be a client there. There has to be a victim or a case that is actually taken up, so that that case can be put in front of a judge to be questioned. You can't just willy-nilly take a case and put it in front of a judge. So when we looked about, I think 50 years ago, or I forgot how many years ago, I'm sorry, but when asbestos was a problem, the whole idea of that negligence for asbestos cases wasn't properly litigated on, and it was up to these team of lawyers and these amazing people who could have lost everything, by the way, to say, no, we are going to take this up to the Supreme Court because we believe that the law is unjust and it has to be changed, and the Supreme Court has to see this case. So at great cost to themselves, they decided to take that case all the way up to the Supreme Court, which they could have completely lost anyway and lost everything. So in that sense, the people who take these cases all the way up, they are also heroes in their own right, because otherwise there would be no litigation on that matter.
Wow, that's amazing. So we discuss about laws that exist and we want to make change, but what about industries or concepts that are so new and novel? Which is our second question, which is when a whole new concept or industry, for example, cryptocurrency, genetic editing, comes to the market.
Mhm.
Is there a process in creating new legislation in this field, or do we have to wait until something happens?
Yep, that's a very good question. It really links back. Your questions are very well organized, Justin. So when it comes to creating new legislation, it comes back to Parliament. Only Parliament can create something out of nothing. It is their job and it's their prerogative to create new legislation. So in the meantime, until they actually come out with, let's say, the Cryptocurrency Act 2021, until they actually come out with something like that, you'll find that lawyers have to make do with the statutes that they have, with the existing case law that they have. So you'll try to argue it on the basis of maybe finance law or contract law under existing legislation. Your lawyer's job will be trying to argue that cryptocurrency is a service or cryptocurrency is a good or something. It's up to the individual lawyer where they think. Obviously, disclaimer, this is not my area of expertise, but generally what we find is that whenever there's a new developing area of law, while waiting for Parliament to create legislation on that area, lawyers will have to just make do with what is currently existing and litigate based on that, at least until Parliament comes in with something else.
I see. Quite interesting. And now another question our viewers have asked is something to
Mm-hmm.
do with the conflicts. For example,
Mm.
can there be laws that conflict with one another? And if so, how can they be resolved? For example, trade between countries, age restrictions on activities, or usage of illegal substances during travel.
Oh, excellent question. This is one of the questions that we asked and we had to study. So these are one of the basic concepts that you have to learn because you eventually have to use them all throughout. When it comes to countries and things like that, it's very jurisdiction based. So generally you are bound to the laws of the country you are in, not your nationality necessarily. I mean, there are exceptions. Everything in law has exceptions, but you're generally bound by the rules of that particular country. So that answers, I think, one part of the question, where you draw the line between that. But if there are conflicting legislations, we generally work under the assumption that the newest one will override it. So we have what we call a explicit or a implicit retraction, repudiation. I forgot the term. I'm so sorry, but it basically means that either explicitly the statute will say that I don't know, the XXX Act of 1998 is now repealed to be replaced with this. So that's a very explicit, like we are throwing this all away. Or it could be an implicit one where if the new legislation directly contrasts or contradicts old legislation, then we just override it in that way. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, it does show that how complex this whole system of law is, especially when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to international relations and all.
Oh,
And
don't get me
now
started.
I like to pivot a little bit to the individual, the person, like
Mm.
maybe the lawyer or the person who wants to study law. Because question 4, we have a viewer asking, I'm an introvert myself and not really outspoken. Could I still be a lawyer?
Yes, definitely 100% yes. There is the misconception that lawyers are just these people who like to talk and in front of a court. And that is true. That's just the one that's famous on TV. But behind a team of lawyers are also a team of other lawyers who are helping with things like research, with things like looking for the best points. Because, like I mentioned from just now, there's so much to cover. Parliament has created these many statutes that it may fall under. uh, the judges have created these many common laws, and that's just within this jurisdiction within the past 20 years. What if we look at other countries? What if we look at other years as well? So if you're trying to argue a point, and we did this for, okay, small tangent. One of the competitions that I did back in Queens, we basically had no solid case per se. Our client was wrong by law in a way, but what we had to do was we were advocating for an evolution of the law. We were advocating that the law is outdated and we need to evolve it. And if we had won that point, we would have changed. I mean, if it was a real case, we would have changed the law at that point, and our client would have won, or maybe not would have won. Depends. Everything depends. But basically, we see that application of the law is not the only thing that we do. Sometimes we have to advocate for maybe slight changes. We have to advocate for maybe, yes, this is the law, but our case is actually quite different from this. It's more similar to this. And then you pull out something else, which is more similar. So what I'm trying to say, long story short, is that there's a lot of research that goes into preparing a case, into being a lawyer. And a lot of lawyers may not necessarily like to talk. I have a lot of classmates who are not the most extroverted people, who do not enjoy speaking in front of classes. And so they are the people who really enjoy just doing the legal research, preparing the documents. We also have solicitors or conveyancing lawyers who are almost exclusively always within the law firm. So they are the ones drafting your commercial contracts. They are meeting the client. So you're talking to a client and you're assessing their needs. Oh, sorry, you're assessing their needs, you're assessing what they need, and you're drafting those contracts. You're maybe doing mediation, or maybe let's say you buy a house, you need a lawyer to do the stamp duty and all things like that. So there is an entire branch of lawyers who never need to speak in court. Those are, in Malaysia, we call them conveyancing lawyers. In UK, they're more like solicitors. I mean, the lines are not exactly the clearest, but generally we can put them under these umbrellas.
I see. Wonderful, wonderful. You actually answered my next question as well. I was going to
Oops.
ask, like, other than defending in court, what else do lawyers do? But I'm sure what you said about researching, making papers, and consultations, all these things would have been things that they do outside of the court. But is there anything you want to add on to this?
No, I think I've pretty much covered everything. But just on the topic of barristers and solicitors, then people find these terminologies confusing. In the UK, we have a distinction between barristers and solicitors. Their roles are different. The postgraduate courses they study are different. Their pathways are a bit different. Some might switch over, but generally we draw quite a distinct line between solicitors and barristers. There are solicitor advocates as well, but that blurs the line a little bit. In Malaysia, we just call everyone lawyers. But then when you actually work in a company, then you kind of find that some people will prefer litigation or conveyancing. Litigation is going to court and conveyancing is documents. So then the distinction is there, but it's not hard. So in Malaysia, you can pretty much fluidly switch. It's just up to you.
Nice, nice. So let's move on to the next question here. Another viewer asks, are stenographers still used today? And and are courtroom sketches still a thing?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I really wish I knew the answer to this because I honestly have not been to court since COVID. I've never managed to go to a real court except for a high school visit when I was like 17. So I really don't know the answer to this. I'm so sorry. But I can tell you why we use sonographers and why sonographers will likely be around for longer compared to AI, if you're interested in that.
Yeah, I've definitely seen people use the voice to text functions on many
Mhm.
occasions. Like even in my own research field as well, we have used this for interviews. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure whether s- stenographers will still be around in the next decade, but yeah, it's quite interesting. I was curious about the courtroom sketches thing. Are they? I'm not sure if they still go on, but like, is there a reason why sketch they had sketches and not use photographs?
I think back in the day, it was just because we didn't like recording devices in courtrooms. But what we have is that we have public courtrooms. So a lot of the hearings, civil and criminal cases can be public, but in some cases they are private or they're what we call closed door courtrooms. And in those cases, we really limit the audiences there for one reason or another. So in that case, then we may not want any recording devices or things like that. But sonographers may not necessarily go out of business so soon just because AI isn't good enough to be 100% right most of the time. They can't distinguish between a cough and a shuffle of a paper, for example. And when it comes to courtroom transcripts, especially the judges' judgments, these are so important because they are basically, especially the judges' judgments or directions to the jury, these are your foundations for an appeal, and they can basically determine a person's entire life. So I think that sonographers will probably, personally, I don't think they'll go out of business anytime soon just because the AI just isn't good enough and we cannot risk not having really good transcripts.
That's a fair point because that's with a human element you could tell a person's emotions what they meant. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
things
Yeah.
might have a different meaning when on paper. So
Yep.
a very interesting point. Another question right here is, oh, this one's a bit of a deep one. Why do the law feel unfair sometimes? They have long existed, yet justice doesn't feel always serve.
Yes. So this is it's an unfortunate case where sometimes we see things that we consider unjust or we believe is unjust. And it comes down to the application of the law. So how lawyers argue certain things. Let me think of an example. Okay, I need to preface this by saying that winning your case, what do you want out of your case is the first question you need to ask. Do you want the validation of winning the case and being right? Or do you want the, for example, damages? Some people, they go to court just for the money because they need the compensation either for their medical bills or to pay off the losses that they experience in life. They don't really care about the validation aspect. And some people, on the other hand, they care more about the validation than getting a penny. So sometimes what we see is that people can win a case and walk away with nothing. Or you could maybe lose a case, but through the magic of math and calculations with your costs and things like that, you actually don't lose a lot. Or you might even walk away with a settlement at the very end, for example. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that it's not very clear cut. Just because you win doesn't mean you actually win. It does depend on what you wanted to get. What we see is that the idea that theoretically the judges and the lawyers are there to take what Parliament said, these hard and fast rules, and soften them and cushion them and mold them into the different aspects of humanity and human life. And sometimes we find that because judges are also human, lawyers are also human, there are internal biases and there are systems to combat these biases, but they may not necessarily always work well. But there is always going to be a legal principle behind it. It's just which legal principle did we apply and how well did we apply it to. So, for example, let's say we talk about a murder case, right? You know that the person is in your gut, this person is a murderer. They intended to kill, but there's just no evidence of intention. There's evidence that the person stabbed the person. There's evidence that the stab caused death and all these things, but there's no evidence of intention. But everyone knows that. What the smart prosecutor would do in that case to get justice would be to charge for manslaughter, either voluntary or involuntary, depending on the situation. You may not get the title of murderer. You may not get convicted guilty of murder, but at the end of the day, you still get to put someone away for almost life sentence or maybe 20 years at least. So there are many ways to skin a cat, essentially. And it is up to the lawyers and the judges to find a way to get to the same outcome. And there is a balancing act between how high do I want it and how likely am I to get it. So if I can't prove murder, but I can definitely prove manslaughter, I will probably charge for manslaughter just because I know I can secure a conviction here. And that's just for criminal law. Obviously, prosecutors aren't out to convict you, but in the sense of like when we're looking for justice. Yeah.
I see. Thank you for answering that. That was a quite. I believe that was a very difficult question, but
Very solemn.
yeah. Thank you for sharing on that. Now let's move on to a bit more fun questions. Just a
Okay.
few more from our viewers.
No,
Are
I'm
they
very happy to answer.
are they juries in Malaysia or is it just a US thing?
So the jury system doesn't really exist in Malaysia at the moment. It used to be a thing, it's not a thing anymore. But in the UK, it is very much a thing. We see that mostly for criminal trials. So Crown Court and above, we have a jury. So when we are doing our advocacy classes in the bar school, we will address a jury and we will learn about not different types. We don't go into like, how do you analyze a jury? Like, in the movies, they're like, oh, this is the mother, and then she will be more predispositioned if you pull at these strings and things like that. We don't do that, obviously, but we do learn that you have to read a jury, you have to read their facial expressions, and what kind of advocate do you want to be to a jury. So personally, I'm that kind of advocate that's very explanatory. I like to talk to a jury very slowly and explain to them very carefully what's going on, and then I'll highlight. So essentially, the question that we need to answer today is just this. It doesn't matter about all these other things. I need to tell you about these other things, but at the end of the day, the only question you need to ask yourself is, did he intend to do this, for example, like that. So yes, there is juries in the UK as well, but not in
I see.
Malaysia.
Then what about Malaysia? Who decides the
The judge.
final Oh, the judge. Oh, just one person?
It depends. So it's very typical. Like there's this meme that's just like lawyers' answer to everything is it depends, and I find that
I
I do
see.
that a lot. In lower courts, you may have one or two lay judges. I have to caveat as well. I'm not very familiar with the Malaysian system per se because I've been studying the UK law, but I think generally it applies across the board. Where in lower courts you may have one or two judges, less number of judges, and then the higher you go, you have a panel of judges. Yeah, but definitely at the high courts you won't have just one solo person. So the higher courts, because I've been to a high court hearing before and there was only one judge.
I see. It's quite interesting to see how different we are from many different countries.
Mhm.
Hmm. Another
But in
question.
jury
Yes,
courts, sorry, I just need to say this. In jury courts, there's still a judge. There's still a judge.
I
Yeah.
see. Okay. And moving on. That's just two, three more. Do
Mhm.
lawyers are lawyers like medical students? Do they go for housemanship where they get to observe real court hearings and get involved?
Housemanship. So it's not built into our course like medical degrees. Medical degrees, housemanship is part of your course. But to be a lawyer, like I mentioned, you have to do pupillage. So throughout your life, you would do internships and mini pupillages. But then once you finish your postgraduate, then you have to do a pupillage. So that differs based on Malaysia or the UK, but you have to do this training year essentially where you are basically working under a mentor or your lawyer and you're learning the ropes from scratch. And it feels like you're already working a full-time job even though you are just a pupil, but then after that, after you finish your pupillage, then you're a fully qualified lawyer.
I see. Which also brings us to the next question. Should people get a lawyer in their lives, or should they only seek one when they are in trouble?
Oh, very, very good question. So I know that a lot of people think that as long as I can avoid a lawyer in my life, it's a good thing. And that may not always be the case. When you want to buy a house, if you're not sure, get a lawyer. If you want to write a will, if you're not sure, get a lawyer. I think the same advice doctors would give. Prevention is better than cure. If you are unsure, then get a lawyer to do it for you. There's a lot of things you can do yourself. You could legally represent yourself in court. I mean, in the UK, I'm not sure about in Malaysia, but you could legally represent yourself in court. You don't have to hire a lawyer. But do you really want to do that? Do you really want to go through? Remember all that I've told you, and I haven't gone into the process yet. Do you really want to do that all yourself? It's a very important question you have to ask yourself. If you can you do it well? Is it worth hiring a lawyer? And there are also government appointed lawyers. So I would say when push comes to shove, leave it to the professionals. Or if you want to prevent getting into problems, then get a lawyer. Because a lot of times your lawyers are fighting over things that weren't properly drafted. For example, a contract. Because the contract wasn't properly drafted in the first place, that's why you need to hire lawyers to fight over what the word for keyboard means, because you didn't define what keyboard means in your contract because you didn't draft it well in the first place. So yeah, don't always go to a lawyer for every little thing. Google can help, but you need to know what to Google. And when in doubt, get legal counsel, I would say.
Of course, I agree totally with you. It's like getting a flu. You can check your symptoms and then
Mhm.
see a doctor if you think it's severe, but you should never do a open heart surgery on yourself.
Exactly. You shouldn't even sew yourself up. You don't even talk about open heart surgery. If you get a cut on your leg, you shouldn't be stitching yourself up unless you know what you're doing.
Man, sounds like one of those Die Hard movies.
Like pull the
but
stake out and then start sewing.
but yeah, final last question here. What do you see
Okay.
yourself in 5 years?
All right. 5 years from now, I will be 20. Okay, I'm not gonna say it. Oh, okay. 5 years from now, I'm hoping to I'll either be working at a firm that I really enjoy as like one of their good litigation lawyers, either criminal or family, or I will be a partner in my own firm, depending how things go. I have a close friend of mine who we've basically talked about starting our own firm, and it's our dream to do that. And between him and I, we can cover most of the law. So I do criminal law, he does a lot of IP, and then your bread and butters are contracts and torts. So between both of us, we can basically have a almost full service law firm. So that was also in the works. But whether that happens in 5 years is it really will depend on fate. But at the same time, I do aspire to consistently moonlight and still freelance because I love hosting. I still love YouTube. So I really want to try my best to keep both of these elements. I have sacrificed YouTube over the past 9 months for bar school, but I'm hoping that if things allow it, I will definitely keep both of these.
Awesome. That's a wonderful way to end all these questions. Thank you so much for
Thank
answering them.
you.
I'm sure our viewers will be so delighted to hear your answers to their burning questions. Now, now we have come to the end of the session. Just want to quickly check in with you. Is there anything you want to share with us? What's going on with your life? Anything you want to talk about?
Oof, wish me luck. I'm trying to get pupillage at this really amazing firm that I've been eyeing. Personally, I like small to medium firms because that's just the style I prefer. And this master that I found, she seems really amazing. So fingers crossed that I get the pupillage, I guess. The life update.
Awesome. And besides that, I also do want to give you a shout out to your YouTube channel because
Thank you.
I was a guest at your podcast just a week ago, and I'm very
Yep.
excited to say that Sue Lyn's content is very informational, very interesting, and I'm sure viewers here would definitely enjoy the content over there. There will
Thank
definitely be a
you.
link in the description where you can find Sue Lyn's YouTube channel. Would there be anything else you would like me to shout out?
I guess my Instagram. So we'll leave links to that down below as well. You basically see how I live my life trying to go green. I have entire Instagram highlights dedicated to my collapsible Tupperwares, collapsible cups, and metal straws.
Not only Sue Lyn fights for the people, but she fights for the planet.
Thank you. You're so sweet, Justin. It's been amazing coming on. And my content, that episode is definitely very educational because Justin comes on to share about biological research, which is basically this, but biological research version because it's all Justin's expertise. So definitely check that out as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Sulin, for joining us today. I really am humbled to be able to hear your story, to learn from you, and definitely to know to get to know what else you do in your life. It's truly an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's been an honor to be here. It's so fun. I can't believe it's been an hour already.
Surely is. But once again, just a little disclaimer to our viewers: everything said here is not legal advice. Please consult and please consult a lawyer if you have any questions. But nonetheless, if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask both of us, please leave them in the comments. And thank you for listening. Once again, I am very grateful to have you here, Sulan. I can't wait to see
Thank
what
you.
comes next.
Thank you so much, Justin. I cannot wait to talk to you again.
All right. And that's a wrap.